Well, yeah, it's the end of the world, but you gotta laugh, right? Hello there, folks, and yes, I have now seen all 6 episodes of Good Omens. Now, I had been planning to get to this regardless, but honestly, with the backlog of stuff that I've been trying to get to and catch up on and a bunch of other stuff, I wasn't sure I was going to get to it right away. That call got made for me because this is, in fact, a Patreon-sponsored review. So that moved it up the docket to basically as soon as I could get it out, and so let's talk about it. Now, Good Omens is, of course, based on the novel by the same name, which was written in collaboration between Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. Now Terry Pratchett is sadly passed away. Neil Gaiman wrote the scripts for this and was an executive producer. And I have read the original book. It's been a while. It's been probably close to 20 years since I've read it. So this is not going to be a case where I can lay out for you what the differences are. What I can tell you is nearly everything that I remembered, not quite everything, but nearly everything I remembered showed up in some form in the show. So this really feels like one of those adaptations that is trying to just directly translate the original work to a new medium as faithfully as is possible. This is not a reimagining. This is not like, oh, well, we'll include some stuff before and a little stuff after and like a side plot that wasn't there before. It's not that kind of thing. I couldn't really remember, but apparently from what I saw, the Archangel Gabriel, which is the character played by John Hamm, wasn't really in the book much, but Gaiman says that the characterization of him was something that he had discussed with Pratchett that I can't remember if it was either they wanted to introduce him in possibly a follow-up book or if they were going to have him in Good Omens and ultimately decided to cut him. Whatever it was, this wasn't something, at least according to him, that he created out of whole cloth for the show. It was an adaptation of stuff that he'd done with Pratchett that just didn't make the original novel. So, what is the plot of this thing, in case you don't know, if you haven't read the book, which honestly you should, although I'll flash back to my video that I did before about whether you should read books or see the adaptations first. This is one of those cases where I really think you should see the adaptation first, because since it is so faithful, reading the book is just going to give you the more complete experience, because some stuff still gets trimmed. I can even cite a couple of specific things that are like, oh, I liked it a little better with how the book did it. Stuff that had stuck in my memory. So, but it is so faithful that the adaptation is a slightly simplified version. So I recommend seeing that first so that you can enjoy that and then read the book and get even more. If you read the book first, assuming you haven't read it already, then you are going to do what I did, which is have little moments of, they didn't use the... Which, I mean, annoys me that I had that feeling at a couple of points in this show because it's really good. So plot! The plot is basically, it's the end of the world, as in the classic biblical end of the world. We are dealing with Armageddon here. We are dealing with the Antichrist coming to usher in the end of the world. The son of Satan is on earth. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are being summoned. The Leviathan, they call it the Kraken, but like great beasts from the ocean are rising. This is the end game. It's going on. But see, there's 2 people. There's an angel and there's a demon who have been on earth for pretty much the whole time the planet's been here. And they've, never technically been on the same side of anything. They've been around each other enough that, they're friends. And that is Crowley. He changes his name. For some reason, his original name stuck with me more. But there's Crowley, played by Dave Tennant, who is, of course, a demon. And there is Aziraphale, who is played by Michael Sheen. Obviously, they are almost polar opposites in terms of look, characterization, approach to things. And the 2 of them are looking around at Earth and everything that's going on. They spot a couple of things about Armageddon that aren't actually going exactly as they were supposed to. And then they realize we kind of don't want the world to end. We like the world, and we like it here, and we think these people deserve better. So they then set about trying to figure out, how do you foil the apocalypse? Like the biblical apocalypse. Well, that's your story. That's your basic story anyway. There are a lot of other characters that appear in this. You have the descendant of an incredibly accurate prophet, who is following the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter. She's like her great, I forget how many greats it is, granddaughter, following these prophecies, trying to do her best by them and achieve the best goals out of what these sometimes difficult to interpret prophecies are telling her. She encounters a very haphazard would-be computer engineer who seems to just be poison to technology. Now that young man has fallen in line with the last remaining Witchfinder. The Witchfinders used to be a whole organization who found witches. But he's basically the last one left. That character's played by Michael McKean. I apologize for not mentioning the actors for the other one. I'm probably gonna only mention the actors who I knew from other stuff. But he's basically just kind of very... It's a formality. The fact that he's even still around and he's technically running the Witchfinder army, but he recruits this young man, so he gets roped into that. There is sort of a soothsayer character who's a charlatan, and she's not legit, but she's in the mix. There is the aforementioned Antichrist and his 3 friends. So you have this little troop of 4 kids that have a dynamic not dissimilar to, like, I don't know, It or Stranger Things or Stand By Me. It's that kind of, they just mesh well together. These are really good friends. And then you have other angels, like I had mentioned John Hamm as Gabriel. You've got other angels beside that. You've got other demons. There's a lot going on. But for how many characters there are, this does a pretty dang good job of presenting and streamlining more or less the entirety of the book in about 6 hours. It's really well done, and the visuals are quite nice as well. I think, while I'd say there is actually possibility for, if they wanted to do a follow-up of some manner, there's enough, at the end that you could probably put together something. But this is a complete experience, which is probably why it looks so good. Because they're going in, again, I suspect there's some people somewhere like, maybe if it's good enough, we get to do more. But, like, this is being presented as a complete experience. And sort of knowing that they get film caliber actors in roles, people who don't often do a lot of TV, or if they do, it's only like a few guest spots. So, it's really a well together piece, the kind that you don't get that often anymore, because not many networks, be they streaming or traditional television, do basically the limited miniseries anymore. Everything is intended to be an ongoing franchise for as long as possible. Because I can remember back in, like, when I was a kid, 80s, 90s, and honestly before that, even, there were things like Roots and Lonesome Dove, and, and not always things that or honestly, the original It, that was basically a miniseries. It was 2 TV movies. So this kind of, we're going to spend more money on this than you'd normally see in a TV series, but it's going to have the breathing room and the time that you wouldn't get from a movie. That, in some ways, feels a bit like a dying art, because since most studios want the projects to keep going ad infinitum, they will kind of put a spending cap, because they're like, we can't spend everything on this, because we need to have somewhere to go if we need to up the budget in the next season. But this isn't designed like that. So it's nice, and it's a very complete presentation. And all the performances are good. Honestly, the standout for me, as much as I love Tennant, and he is great in this kind of devil-may-care, fast-talking role, I wonder why he's so good at that, but honestly, the standout for me was Michael Sheen. Aziraphale is so endearing. He's so neurotic. He's so second-guessing of himself, but he's so sweet. Oh my gosh, I love him to death. But all the performances are really good. And Tennant gets the bonus of, not only does he get to tear butt around in this really awesome vintage car, but he gets to do it pretty much always while listening to Queen. And you can't go wrong listening to Queen, as far as I'm concerned. So that that's great stuff. The kids are quite good, and like that could have easily been a stumbling point, because young actors playing anything heavy is always potentially going to be a rough ride. And like, especially the kid who plays Adam, he's got a lot of weight to pull, and he does it pretty well. It's not like amazing. I mean, I'm kind of glad they had other stuff to cut to. If the whole series was him, like, it might not have held up. But for how much the character's in it, yeah, it works. And he's solid, and his dynamic with the other kids is good. We've also got voiceover narration from Frances McDormand, and that is sort of the series' way of injecting a little bit of the narrative voice from the novel. Because I talked a little bit about this when I did my video on Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that one of the big things you lose in translating a literary medium into a visual one of any kind, whether it's movies or TV, or honestly even an audio one, is you lose the authorial voice. Because you can certainly keep the dialogue and you can keep character voices, but the way that things are described, the word choices, and the analogies made in the telling of the narrative, that tends to get lost. And Terry Pratchett, I would actually in some ways call him about the fantasy equivalent to Douglas. He is to fantasy what Douglas Adams is to science fiction, at least from my not having read a ton of Terry Pratchett, but from what I've read, I feel safe in that comparison. And in both cases, they do a lot of great work in terms of just giving the description of something, that little extra flavor. And not to downplay Neil Gaiman's contributions, but having read a lot of Neil Gaiman and a little bit more of Pratchett, Good Omens tonally is much more in keeping with Pratchett, and the feeling I get is that Gaiman sort of adapted his style to fit Pratchett more than Pratchett adapted to fit him. So I do feel tonally it is much more in keeping with Pratchett than in Gaiman, because Gaiman, while he does have his own style, he's also a writer for hire, and he can and has been a bit more of a chameleon, and he can and has adopted other tones from other writers if he felt the need to, and I kind of feel like that's what he did here. So we do get to keep a little bit of that kind of flavor through the voiceovers, the narration from Frances McDormand. That said, there are tiny little things that I'm like, oh, but that really stuck in my head. Oh, nuts. Nothing substantive, nothing like significant or plot or like, oh, man, they got that character wrong. Although my vision for Death, I don't mean visually, but in terms of the performance, doesn't quite line up with what we got here. But then again, it's been so long since I read it, I don't know if I'm remembering it wrong, so I can't make that comparison. But the one thing I'll feel comfortable talking about. So I mentioned the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter. Now, the way it's presented in the show is basically that she just knew all this stuff and wrote it down, and she just seemed to know, all of it. Now, that's not to say it negates the way that it's presented in the novel, but I like the way it's presented in the novel a little bit better, and it's never sort of laid out that way in the show. Because the way it's laid out in the novel is, there's actually a comparison made. It's like she's looking at an atlas through a straw. So she's seeing things and knowing exactly what they are, knowing when they happen, but she has no context for any of it. And she's writing down prophecies that may not be important whatsoever. So the example that's given is on the date that Kennedy was assassinated, the prophecy that she wrote referred to a tree falling over in England, because her concern was her own descendants. So she was concerned that one of them might be in that part of England when that tree fell over. So that's what she wrote down. And the show doesn't really have that. The show basically has all prophecies are helpful. And obviously this woman just basically knew everything was going on. And using gamer terminology, it makes Agnes Nutter a little OP, little overpowered, whereas she's a little bit more nerfed in the way it's presented in the book, and I kind of preferred that. But those kinds of things are nitpicks, and they're only nitpicks that I have because I read the book. If I hadn't read the book, honestly, I don't think I'd have anything to complain about this, because by the time it was done, I was just smiling. I was just happy. This was time well spent watching this show. And it left me at a good place, which was good, because some stuff's been going on lately that, has not had me in a good place. But this show about the end of the world that doesn't sugarcoat it or present the fact that the world is ending as something to laugh at still managed to cheer me up quite a bit. So take that as your bullet point review. I think I managed to avoid spoilers while still talking about what I liked, so we'll wrap it up there. Good Omens! You seen it yet? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff down there to do because you can support the show through Patreon. Likes, those help. Subscribe if you haven't already. That's much appreciated as well. Plus, there's links to merch. I got stuff up for Pride and all that. So click the links, check it out. Or don't. You don't have to, folks, because as much as I appreciate it, at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.